All right. All right. Hi, everybody. I am Tom Torme, and this is the Cosmic Comic Nation, powered by Comic Con Radio. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm blessed that I have a great guest with me, a gifted educator, a comic book aficionado. Tim Smyth is the author of the book Teaching with Comics and Graphic Novels, and I'm so happy to have him here with me today. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Tim. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom.
I appreciate it. Oh, that's awesome of you to say. I know I reached out to you a little while ago, and you were so kind and you responded so promptly. So I really do appreciate that. And as a fellow educator yourself, we're both teaching for over 20 years now, and we're both proponents of using comic books in the classroom, and I couldn't wait to talk to you. So, Mr. Smyth, Tim Smyth, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I've been teaching since the day before 9/11. I've been around for a while. I teach high school social studies. I also do teach courses through the University of Pennsylvania. I teach graduate level coursework to educators. And we use my book and other resources, teaching literacy across the curriculum, things like that. I travel around the country giving professional development at Comic Cons and libraries. And it's just been a really amazing experience that it just all comes from comics and doing what I love to do.
And that is so cool. And in terms of just as you're traveling around, as you're going to different cons, and I'm sure this question comes up quite a bit, but most educators have a story behind why they got into the field in the first place. So in terms of why you not only got into the field, but why comic books became such an inspirational part of your program. What led to comic books really being that important in your work?
Yeah, so I got an education because my dad was a big history buff, and he always told stories about history. So I always saw the story side of history, not all the facts and the memorization. But with comics, I mean, I grew up in Philadelphia and I loved hip hop. I grew up on, Public Enemy and comic books. But like we were saying earlier, I kind of hid my love for comic books because back then, being a nerd, you didn't say that on the street, right?
Yeah, no, comic books were so subculture for so long. You denied it. I understand that completely.
Yeah, and then I have 3 kids of my own now, and my son was called a reluctant reader in kindergarten. And I get all into my son. He's got this invisible illness of this really rare form of meningitis. So he's got a lot of things stacked against him. And I watched him kind of give up on school. He didn't want to read like those Bob board books. I mean, they just weren't there for him. And so his teacher thought it was his love of like superheroes and all that kind of stuff that was taking him away from learning how to read her way. And I was like, but he wants to read comics, so why wouldn't we? And so we actually pulled him out of that school. It was a private school, and ever since then, he reads everything now. And he's in 9th grade, and he's going to school for graphic design. He's going to a tech school. He's really super excited for all that, and he loves to read. He writes reviews for books online, and it's really been fantastic to see him grow from there. And then I went back to college to get my master's degree as a reading specialist. And I was the only non-elementary school teacher, and I was the only male in the entire program that they had ever had. And they started giving me all this data about how boys didn't like to read. And it really clicked. And I said, well, what are you giving these kids to read? Mm-hmm. And no mention of comics. So I thought about my son again. And so my professors encouraged me to do, and I did in 2007, wrote a master's thesis on using pop culture and comics in the classroom. And ever since then, it kind of has just grown organically. And then last thing for my origin story is when it really clicked in my own classroom was when Miles Morales came out. So Miles Morales, of course, biracial Spider-Man. And I had an African-American student, male in my classroom, who was really quiet. And it's the first time I started talking about how comics were changing. And I was like, oh, as a history teacher, and we look around the world, and he actually stayed after class to talk to me for the first time. And it kind of gives me chills. It was like he was more impressed that Spider-Man looked like him than our president did, right? Like a black president to him was like, oh, okay, that's cool. But Spider-Man? And so then we started talking about how Captain America was changing and Jane Foster's Thor and all these things. And so I was passionate about it. My kids were passionate about it. And then we started doing this whole thing is like history is everything. It's not just within the textbook. It's all around us.
Oh, yeah. That really is fantastic. And what really resonates with me is that you not only had people inspiring you to follow your passion in terms of pursuing comic books and their use in the classroom, but you also did that with your own son, and now you're doing it with your own students. But I'm sure you could probably attest to your own son's teacher way back then, as you mentioned. No one was mentioning comic books, and even to this day, as you mentioned, even though comic books have gone, or at least superheroes, I should say, really have gone from being the subculture to the mainstream, and you could probably give credit to a lot of that to things like the MCU. But comic books themselves generally are still, we love art. We we hang all the art in a museum, and we love poetry, and we love the written word. But yet when we put it together, we were dealing with something that people view as generally juvenile. As you go around and as you're talking at cons and you're talking at different schools and you're talking to different educators, do you experience any kind of resistance to the inclusion of comic books in the classroom?
Well, it's funny because when you present it like a comic book convention, like they're with you, like they're they're there. But I've had so many teachers come up to me. They're like, we never even thought. Like we've been coming to Comic Cons and we've loved comics for our whole life. We never really even thought. And so there's that. And then when I go to like a regular, like I just presented at the National Council for the Social Studies conference in Philadelphia, and I presented with Andrew Iden and Laurie Hulse Anderson, and we talked about their graphic novels and using that about, we talked about book banning, and we talked about the civil rights movement and the Me Too movement, all this through comics. So I do sometimes get pushback sometimes from art teachers of all things.
From art teachers, really?
Art teachers, yeah. That it's not art, as you said, and I do. And I get some pushback even from some people in my own school district. And that's okay. Like, you don't have to do what I do. The idea is that let's open up our doors a little bit more and find kids in any way that we do. Like, I actually don't teach a comic book classroom. I teach a history course. I teach global history and American history. And in that, one of my tools are comic books. So we're not replacing traditional literature with comics. It's just an additional tool.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think not enough people are opening their minds to the idea that, again, you're not replacing your curriculum. You're not replacing everything you're supplementing it. These are additional resources that you can use in the classroom. And as you're going around and as you're speaking your mind and you're opening eyes to this whole new world of comic books and graphic novels. And I still, to this day, I tell people all the time, I have students, depending on who I'm talking to. I'm talking to students, comic books. That's the word I use. When I'm talking to educators, I like to use graphic novels. Sometimes people ask me what the difference is, and I tell them I'm not entirely sure. I usually say graphic novels is the one we use where we want educators or people to feel a little bit better about the idea that they're reading a comic book. A lot of people are very dismissive. I mean, because I think comic books as a medium get lumped together. Like everything just gets lumped into it. They think comic books, they think big splashes of onomatopoeia, they think big capes and muscles, but it's so much more than that, right? There are so many books that even the ones that like it'd be like saying that all books are worthy of academia, which is not true, right? I mean, I don't think in middle school and high school, I don't think anyone's studying 50 Shades of Grey. So you're not going to dismiss all books as being unworthy of study. And I do think that comic books get that just kind of juvenile that teachers and just generally the mainstream kind of looks down on as something less. But as you're opening these eyes, as you're opening people to this world, have you found that this kind of has presented, and as you've mentioned, presenting out on panels with the artists, with the writers, has your passion opened up new doors for you? Has it opened up opportunities for you outside the classroom?
Yeah. In fact, you happen to mention Scholastic, and I know we'll talk about that later, but like Scholastic just hired my wife and I to write. So Sunshine from Jared Kozowski is not out yet. Jared's a phenomenal human being that I know very well. And I've used Hey Kiddo in my own classroom. So they've hired me to write the teacher guides. And so Scholastic really understands that connection. And a lot of times teachers they're looking for the resources, like, how do I use that? So like Laurie Hall Sanderson, we wrote the teacher's guide for the Speak graphic novel, the adaptation of Speak. And it's just that idea that if you're a novice, if you haven't grown up on comics, if you don't know the power of visual literacy, if you don't know, that can be intimidating. And I think that's where a lot of people are coming from. They don't have that experience. So with those teacher guides, when these publishers are, now that they're on board, I mean, these are the books that are the most checked out of libraries. It is the largest continually growing aspect in publishing is with graphic novels. And so they see the dollar signs, they understand those connections. And so, and it seems to be a uniquely American problem where a lot of the rest of the world, comics and graphic novels aren't looked down upon as much. Now I forgot where I was going with that, but yeah, in terms of the opportunities, I think, and people say this all the time, it's not just a comic aspect. It's people see the fire that lights me up about being able to use my passion in the classroom. And so if my talks inspire somebody to use whatever else in their life in their classroom, I think sometimes as teachers, we need that permission that it's okay. And so if nothing else, if I can get that across to people, it is okay. But like Kansas, the Social Studies Conference Council of Kansas is flying me out on their keynote speaker for their conference in a couple of months. I've presented to the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Like I said, I get to work with the University of Pennsylvania. So yes, comics are in the Ivy League, right?
That's impressive. And it really is amazing how far the industry has come in so many ways, including, in academia. That's amazing.
Yeah. And then we were talking earlier, last thing is, I've worked with the United States State Department, and through COVID and through school shutdowns, and we've taught online to cohorts of hundreds of teachers in every continent around the world except for Antarctica. And we talked
so
far. Right.
We'll get to them eventually. We'll get to them.
But we talked about American culture, and American pop culture means a lot to people around the world. And all of a sudden we were connecting through language barriers because of visual literacy and because kids around the world know who these heroes are. But also I got to learn about personal experiences from Ramadan and from different holidays and things where language wasn't a barrier because we created comics together. And so we could use that visual literacy where we didn't have to rely so much on the language, where visually we could understand what we were all saying.
So just to build off of that for 1 second. So in the classrooms, and as you're traveling around, as you're speaking to different educators and you're talking about what's going on in the classroom, is it a conversation that you have there where you talk about students consuming, like just reading, or is it an encouragement to create as well?
Yeah, it's almost 50-50. It's that power of students being creators. I have students, like when we read the March graphic novels based on the life of John Lewis, my students, and they research a modern civil rights issue, and then they create their own comic book, and they do an annotated works cited page for it. They do citations and quotes, and so it's a real research project. But it's also, and we also do a more traditional research paper and essays and things. But again, this is another tool in that toolbox, and it's probably the favorite activity that they have for the year. And they're super excited about doing something different, and they can do it as a team.
And that last part, that's just so important. Not only working as a team, as all comic book creators generally do have to work on a team, and as they get into the real world, they also learn those skills as well. But you're also connecting with something that they're passionate about, as you did in your own son case, and now you're doing with students. It seems all around the world that once you find that passion, I think a lot of children love to read. A lot of children just don't simply like to be told what to read. They want to find something that they connect with, and I can't believe it, even this day and age, that people still have kind of issue with that. Yeah. That the children connecting with something that they're passionate about is in some way, shape, or form an issue for them. And if you have to use comic books to connect, by all means, I think it's a great medium to do. But this is a big change in philosophy. I think we could both agree on that. This is a big change in philosophy, even from when we were children. That when if I wanted to get a comic book into the classroom, I had to sneak it in, and I had to pretend I was reading a book and pray to God that the teacher didn't catch me and confiscate my comic book and take it away. What do you think? And I know you mentioned before that Scholastic realizes that there is a financial benefit to filling in and opening up a new audience, but just in terms of that change in philosophy, whereas 30 years ago, or not even even significantly less, comics were not welcome in the classroom. And now, in many cases, I belong to a school where you had mentioned March. I've got March 1, 2, 3. I've got a class set of them in my room. And even as far as 2 weeks ago, my principal came to me and asked me what books I wanted. And I'll be honest with you, and I have it on the screen now, but I reference your page. I go to History Comics on Instagram, and I said, oh, what is Tim Smyth recommending? And these are the kind of books that I want in my classroom, and absolutely encourage it. Whereas 20 years ago, it was unfathomable. I can't even say that word. Unbelievable. Improbable. How about that? I'll say improbable. But you know what I meant to say. I stumbled on that word. What do you think is so responsible for the change in philosophy? Where, how do we end up where we are now?
I think the medium itself has changed, and that's what I say to people all the time when they ask me these questions, and I say, when was the last time you were in a comic book store? And you don't realize, and so people can still look down on the capes and types titles, but listen, like Batman has talked about racial profiling and police brutality. Captain America, Sam Wilson, has talked about immigration and gone down to Mexico. Like, comics and pop culture have always been political, but right. I think the doors have really opened. And I think in terms of graphic novels, like, God bless Raina Telgemeier, like her graphic novels like Smile and Guts, and they became these huge bestsellers. And then you get, of course, like you said, the MCU. And so, okay, fine, you like reading or watching movies about this superhero. Here's a whole bunch of comics I have about these superheroes. And so that idea that reading is reading. But also, like, we just got done teaching about World War I in my class. Oh. And all across the back of my classroom, like, I put books out for every single topic. And over half of my books are graphic novels. And, if the kids are going through and I offer extra credit if they want to borrow a book, they're going to grab that graphic novel. They're going to grab that comic. Just visually, it pulls them in. And then they say, okay, well, I want to learn more about this. And so I think all those things together, I mean, I don't have any one answer, but I think just sure. The medium itself, I think, has allowed us to do it.
All right, I'm going to ask a selfish question because I am also teaching World War I at this very moment. So, is there a graphic novel that you would recommend on World War I?
So probably the Harlem Hellfighters. Oh. Yeah, and I actually have it in English and in Spanish in my classroom. And I have
it on my shelf somewhere back here by Max Brooks.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I had just read that Will Smith bought the movie rights. So wouldn't that be fun? Yeah. And then there's another one, I have in my classroom. It is a 24-foot long tapestry comic book about the first Battle of the Marne. And there's no words. And every panel represents an hour. And so I have it's called Joe Sacco, who's a fantastic, historical graphic novelist. And it's called The Great War. And I have 3 copies, and I lay them out in the hallways. And students from around the school, as they're walking by, they'll stop and they'll read it with my students. And I don't tell my kids anything about World War I. That's how we start. And so it's my kids' job to say, I don't know what's going on there. So they start to write down the questions. I wonder, I see this. Well, wait a minute. My partner didn't see that. I see something different. Well, yeah, but I think he's doing that. But no, I think he's really. And so that's the power of the visual literacy, where if you read 3 sentences in a textbook, it tells you what to think. But that visual literacy allows us to, think on our own.
That is definitely what a great thing to say. And that is definitely a sign that you are a truly gifted educator, because I see that all the time with history, that it's just, for many people, the memorization of facts and data and places, but not the how and the why. There's no thinking, there's no solving, there's no rationalization. It's just memorization. So the fact that you would even do that, and I have to look into that, because that sounds like an amazing book. I admittedly had never heard of it. And that, I mean, how long is this tapestry? How long did you say? I'm sorry.
24 feet. Like it stretches across the entirety
Wow.
of my classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. So it's The Great War by Joe Sacco.
Wow, definitely. That's a guess. Jeez, that sounds amazing. What a great way to introduce the topic. So I guess is it okay if I build off of that and ask, um, because I'm sure with the how busy you are, but it's great that you still get to sit down and have the time to read the graphic novels. Are there any that right now that are at the top of your head that you're recommending that you think that people should be checking out, or not only checking out of the library or picking up at the comic store, but maybe even bringing into the classroom as well?
So my son's favorite and mine too is New Kid from Jerry Craft, which is the first graphic novel to win the Newbery Award, which is fantastic.
Absolutely.
Uh, yeah, but my we're a white family, and so there's this story about this kid, and it's loosely autobiographical about a kid who goes from an inner city school to a wealthy suburbanite school, and so it talks about code switching. It talks about all these things, and my son read this book, and he goes, you know what? I've been a new kid. And he identified with the nerdiness that's in the book. Here's a black kid who's into all kinds of nerdy stuff. Like Jerry Craft is a fantastic human being. And my son was like, I identify with this kid regardless of his color. Yeah, he's got a different background. And okay, I never knew what code switching was as a white kid. So it's all these things all together that I'm also a Project Lit book advisor. That's like a nationwide book club. And we read these kinds of books that open up these conversations with kids. And a lot of them are graphic novels, although there's also prose books too. But it's funny, I just got done reading this book called Ripple Effects. And it's by Fanbase Press. And I'd never read anything like it. So, like I said, my son has this meningitis. He gets these migraines and really bad nerve pain. And it's what's called like an invisible illness. Like you don't see it on him and you wouldn't know. And so this kid in here has diabetes, and so he still turns into a superhero. And so it's this idea that it's an invisible illness that he was able to overcome. And the creators have all these interviews, personal interviews, which I mean, they've made me cry about their own personal experiences with things like schizophrenia, with other invisible illnesses. And as soon as I read it, I had my son read it. I said, this is you. And so I've shared it with my students in my classroom because I do have students with, severe allergies. We had a student who's allergic to water, of all things. I have kids who have type 2 diabetes. And so that's it. Like you can literally see yourself in this comic. So, I mean, I could talk for 5 hours from all the different books that I'm reading, but that one really jumped out at me.
Ripple Effect sounds amazing. And just, I'm sorry?
Yeah, Ripple Effect.
Right. And I do like, and so this brings up another topic that often comes, the concept of kind of responsive teaching, or just simply, looking at works that are going to speak to your children, your students, your audience. I started, and as I mentioned before we went on air, that I had got my master's degree by writing about Superman comics as primary sources. And that's how I started to introduce comics into the classroom as well. These are other ways to study American history. But now it is so much more than that. It's not just using it as a primary source, but it's something that is reflecting its audience as well. Culturally responsive teaching is such an important thing that goes on in our classroom. How can I use, or anyone really, use graphic novels to do that?
So, yeah, I mean, people always say to me, like, you have a comic for everything. And I do. Like, any kind of, I mean, the heroes that are in comics now, I mean, I wish I was growing up. Like, my favorite superhero team is the Champions. You've got, Viv, who's the female, I can't think of his name, a Vision.
Right.
Right. You've got a Korean Hulk. He's now called Braun. You've got, the 16-year-old Pakistani American girl, who's from Jersey City and Miss Marvel. Like, my kids are growing up, and Miles Morales, my kids are growing up with these heroes that's their norm. Correct. Where for you and I growing up, like you had like Lando Calrissian and you had, Black Panther, you had a few things, but not very much. And so if you're looking for something, and sometimes honestly, it's as simple as a kid can walk into my room and see that I have some of these books. I have some of these posters. They see themselves in my room. And it's just kind of, you get this like, this nod of, okay, I see how this guy is without
Mhm.
even a conversation. So yeah, I
It
mean,
definitely creates a more welcoming environment,
yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, we have anything. I mean, in fact, um, there's just a new series of Captain Americas where there's a gay Captain America, female Captain America, there's a Native American Captain America. And so I do this lesson in my classroom where I say, okay, since I teach global history, what would Captain America look like in 50 years, 100 years? What would he have looked like 500 years ago? What's that representation? What are the issues? Things like that. And then we then take it and say, all right, so what would Captain Nigeria look like? What would Captain China look like?
All right.
Um, right. So what are those issues? What's the symbolism from those countries? And so we learn about these things in a very deep and meaningful way. And it really raises that question. When you say Captain America, like that means something. And so then we also talked about like, would a Native American want to be Captain
Mhm.
America? Right. Like, so if I were to force these conversations on my students, it can be a little heavy handed. But if I put that image up on the smartboard and my do now is, it's a simple question about what do you think about this? And then I just let the kids talk. And then
Right.
it's not me telling them what to think. Then they don't feel like they're going to say the wrong thing. And then we have a classroom discussion about these types of things.
Oh, that's genius. And actually, a few months back, you had posted something about a similar lesson where your students or students that you were representing on social media were essentially identifying issues that global issues, possibly like individual to a particular country, and then creating a hero that would be responsive to that. And I will tell you, not only was I enamored with the idea, I tried to adapt it into my own room. I didn't have quite as much success as you did, Mr. Smythe, but I did try my best. So I'll send you a picture of what some of them created. But it was really cool because it got them to not only learn about other cultures, learn about other countries and the issues that they're experiencing, social, economic, whatever it may be. But then they created a hero that would respond to it and a villain that would also be more representative of the issues. And it really got them to learn about countries outside of our borders. So it really was a cool tool. So although I didn't get a chance to thank you months ago when I was inspired by the year, let me thank you for it now because
That's awesome.
everything you, oh, yeah, oh, really. Uh, and when I tell you, I couldn't wait to talk to you because these are the things that are going on, and what your work is definitely inspiring what I'm doing in my classroom. Uh,
That means a lot. Thank you, Tom.
well, I appreciate that. And it means a lot to me that there are people like you out there that are pushing this issue and trying to change the way people are thinking about it. But unfortunately, there are still people that are not as, let's say, forward thinking as someone is like yourself, and there are still annually lists of books that are being banned or removed from the classroom. And maybe not speaking, I mean, whatever you prefer to speak about a particular book or a particular place, but um, as you travel and you end up in areas where you are seeing these books making it onto the ban list, books that you may even be recommending that are making it onto this ban list, what's your general reaction to encountering this?
So when I talk to college students, which I'm always thrilled when I get invited to colleges to talk because we don't have enough education majors anymore. We're seeing declining people going into education, and trying to show them education is so much more. But when I talk about this, because like, oh, I'm going to try this tomorrow, and what I say to them is like, listen, an image will get you into trouble so much faster
Mhm.
than anything else because people can see that and in 30 seconds and they don't know anything else in that book
Right.
and they put it out on social media and you're toast. um, and we have to realize that that's the reality of where we are. So like if you're in a school district that, let's say, bans genderqueer, right, that was a big one that was going around. There's beautiful passages in that book about identification, passages that will literally save lives, but people are going to focus on one or two panels completely out of context. That is your fight as a teacher to talk to your administrator. It is
Right.
not your fight to lose your job over, because, and this, there are many, many titles that we can also include. And so I think that needs to be part of that message of, all right, you lost that battle, let's say over genderqueer. I'm not saying stop fighting, but what I'm saying is, okay, how about these other 10 titles, right? And so that's what I try to do on my website is have like listing of different books and different topics and things like that for that reason. Where I think if you just ban genderqueer, and that's your whole conversation as a school board, you are sending such a awful message to our most vulnerable students. Why not then say, okay, how about some of these other books, graphic novels and things like that? But it's very much something that's still in flux that we're trying to kind of figure out, I think, as educators, because we are in a highly political time. And on the one hand, I'm really thrilled that parents are so involved. Like parents have never, in 15 years of education, you didn't hear a squeak from parents. Now we're hearing from parents on all different sides of politics. And I'm hoping we can harness that and move together as a community. But I think it's so new that we've gone to our corners. But I guess that's what I'm saying is you got to know your district. You got to know what you're doing. I always say, don't let your administrators be surprised by what you're doing. Your administrators are hopefully there to be your friend in terms of support. Talk to your librarian. Are those books in your library? Because if they are, then you're on a lot more solid ground as opposed to, well, I'm a history teacher and I just brought this book in and I didn't ask for permission kind of a thing. So we don't want people losing their jobs, but I've spoken up at school board meetings. My own children have spoken up at their school board meetings over books being banned. So there's that, and that's your civic right. But I don't know how to because I don't have the final answer for all that.
No, right. I understand not putting your career on the line because there are other ways to, and you'll do a lot more good in the classroom continuing this fight rather than getting yourself removed from it. Do you think it kind of forces, so let's say you are in a place that is banning books along that line, and let's say it has a pride flag on the cover of the graphic novel, and a book like that gets banned. I'm just building off of this. But do you think it's kind of forcing writers and authors to kind of go down like the Twilight Zone route where instead of being straightforward in their presentation of the issue, they're kind of circumventing it by disguising it as something else? And where you could look at Planet of the Apes from 1968, I think the original, and you could say, okay, this is a great fun movie, and I love it. But you could also see it as a metaphor. You could also see it as a representation of the civil rights movement, and you could really look deeper. Do you think it's kind of forcing people to where they are banning these books? Do you think it forces them to go that kind of route?
I'm actually seeing, I think, the opposite, where I think authors and creators are saying, screw this, like I'm going to tell my story. And what's funny is Jerry Craft's book, New Kid, was banned. Hey Kiddo has been banned. Speak has been banned. And what we see is what that does is it actually increases book sales.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So there's that aspect to it.
That's true. As soon as you tell me not to do something, it's the thing I want to do more than anything in the world. So I understand that. But
I think the bigger fear is the self-censorship that we're seeing educators and librarians do, where they're afraid to even, go down that path. And so in other words, books are being banned, I think, in some cases without it ever becoming an issue, because the teacher or the librarian is saying, you know what, I just don't think we can do this book right now. That's my bigger fear. Right. It's not on the creator side. It's on the educator and librarian side, because we're all afraid right now.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to. Yeah, that's a terrible way to have to be in the classroom. You shouldn't have to be afraid. Especially the children. God willing, that they are looking at these graphic novels and they're seeing topics and they're seeing people and places or issues that resonate with them, that speaks to them, and that is a good chance for them to not only find voice for themselves, but to then pass it on to others. And the fact that they're banning these things really is, you never thought we would head this route again. Things that you associate with oppressive regimes and we look down on, and yet we mirror so many of the things that they do.
Right. And listen, I'm not saying that, every book is appropriate for every school and every library. Right. I would never say that either. But yeah, it's kind of the direction that we're going right now. But again, I'm also seeing like school board meetings full of children who were there voicing, and I'm seeing the civics in action in a way that I haven't seen since I've been a teacher. And so that is very encouraging as well.
That's great. And that's great that people are fighting back. That not just accepting the banning, not just accepting the censorship, just fighting back and having their voices heard. And that's fantastic. And I hope that does continue. And we do see a shift away from it. It's not national. I can't. I actually. I'm in New York City. I've been teaching for a long time, and I really either. I can't think of a banned book off the top of my head. Are you? I'm not sure what books would make the list in New York City or New York State.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you've got a strong union, you've got, fairly progressive. And so I'm here in Pennsylvania. My district is amazing. And what we've actually found is that some teachers from other districts that are going through this have left those districts and have come to work for us.
Wow.
And so we're actually benefiting because we want that global society.
And you must be drawing great talent that way.
Yes. Great.
Yeah. They're fleeing and they're heading to where they're welcome, and they know that they have a good audience and receptive to their style. That's great. That's what I'd like to see more of that too. Yeah, I guess we right. New York City. I'm proud to say, like I said, my principal supports the inclusion, and I remember at first she was a little hesitant because we had Mouse in the Classroom by Art Spiegelman, and right on the cover is of course the swastika on the cover of the book. And again, like you said, people will just see the image and superficially judge. But when she was aware of the content and the quality of the writing, there was a change. And now I have a class set of them in the room.
It's great,
right? So that's that kind of people make that quick judgment, but once they really dig a little deeper and do some investigating and find out what is really going on in these books, I truly do believe that those fears would subside. It's not indoctrination. It's not, it's awareness. It's responsive.
And I think that awareness piece of it is too, because if you read through some of Shakespeare, if you read Vonnegut, if you read these great works of literature that are in our classrooms, there's so much more raunchy and nobody has a problem with that. So, right.
Yeah. Tim, can I tell you, I swear to goodness, this morning, I was telling someone, it's so strange to me that Romeo and Juliet is such a celebrated piece. I'm sure it's well written, but at its core, it's about two teenagers who barely know each other for a weekend and end up offing themselves at the end of it. And yet this is a romance. I mean, it's never identified as a romance, but what is a tragedy, right? But we identify it culturally as a romantic thing. And yet this is a celebrated work of art that has permeated every classroom for centuries at this point. Yet there are graphic novels that deal with much more as deep of topic, but in a more reasonable sense, and are eye-opening for children. And yet we still love the works of Bill Shakespeare. Yet we're gonna crap on Alan Moore, and I'm not really sure how we as a society have gotten to that point, but I do think it is very superficial at this point. I think once people, like I said, did that reading, they would find that there's a great deal of quality to be had.
Agreed.
Tim, and I appreciate your time, and I certainly don't want to take too much more of it. But is there anything on the horizon for you in the upcoming weeks that we'd like to be aware of, so that we could kind of follow you and take part in what's going on?
Yeah. So for me, it's like people are asking me like, when's your next book? And I'm still not over the trauma of writing the first one through COVID and all that kind of stuff. And
I apologize to cut it, but Tim, your book, and I put it on the screen before, but for those who are listening on the podcast, it's Teaching with Comics and Graphic Novels, and it can be found just about anywhere books can be found. I ordered mine on Amazon.com, and it's a great book, and full of lesson plans and ideas, and great ways to, especially for those who are not as knowledgeable about graphic novels and comics. It's really new, user friendly, let's say. It's like picking up, I always tell people the sign of a really good comic book is like if I could pick up Batman 1072 and I didn't have to read 1071 issues before I got to it. And your book reads like that as well. You don't have to be an expert on comic books to know how to implement these books in the classroom. So I apologize.
No, thank you. I tried to steer away from all the edu speak, and it's like lesson plans that I do in my classroom. It's just ideas. It's just a way that I hope when people read the book, yes, there's specific lessons you can use in your class the next day, but more so than that, it gets you thinking about, okay, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that kind of thing. But in terms of next steps for me, it's just, getting through the second half of the year. And I'm going to put in my book for, we'll see what happens for an Eisner. We'll see what happens with San Diego Comic-Con. There'll be some panels I'll be on and things like that. But, I share all that on social media as it comes up. But right now, nothing too huge. It's just I'm trying to get done. Like I said, my wife and I are working on the teacher guides for Sunshine and Hey Kiddo from Jared Krasaska. So that's kind of occupying our time right now in a very good way.
And I know you're on Instagram at History Comics. We could kind of follow your progress as you and your wife are working on the teacher's guides for that.
Yeah, so my website's teachingwithcomics.com. On Twitter and Instagram, I'm at History Comics. And then I also have 2 Facebook groups. One is Teaching with Comics. That's my own page. And then I also started a teacher group. It's called Comic Book Teachers. And there's authors and illustrators and teachers from around the world in that group. And so when people have questions about how do I do this, or come to that Facebook group, it's a really great kind of community.
I actually do follow you on Facebook. I wasn't aware of that group, so I'll definitely be joining tonight. That's pretty cool. I'm glad that exists. I could always use support. I could always use, as you mentioned before, when the children are working in groups and coming up with ideas. That's how I work best. When we build off of each other's ideas. So thanks a lot for putting that together. I'm sure that's helping a ton of teachers learn how to implement these comics into the classroom. That's pretty cool. Well, Mr. Smyth, I really want to thank you for your time. Tim, it was a pleasure having you, and I hope you keep us informed about what's going on, and you keep in touch, and we get to work together again real soon.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Tom. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Guys, everybody, have a great night. Thanks for joining us. Be well. Stay safe, everybody.